Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem that is one of the true jewels of Leaves of Grass. It's called This Compost. It's a two-part poem. We'll take both parts in one lecture here. This is poem number 6 of the 38 of Autumn Rivulets. And as we pointed out in earlier lectures, notice autumn over-related to the old, rivulets over-related to the young. And so we're going to have this interesting paradox that we'll be playing here. Some scholars have called this, using one of the words from the poem, and this it's really an exquisite meditation on death and dying. Some have argued, a 47-line masterpiece as it relates to life and death. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist. Everything from the first introductory word come, all the way up to and including a set of introductory comments for Autumn Rivulets that I hope you're familiar with as you wade into this one, especially because so much of our big five will come up here, the questions of epistemology and ontology and the like. And of course we just finished with City Dead House. The Norton's reading that will give us a little bit of information here, and quite a bit actually, tells us that this was first published in Leaves of Grass 1856 under the arresting title, quote, Poem of Wonder at the Resurrection of the Wheat, end quote, appeared with revisions in Leaves of Grass 1860 as Leaves of Grass number 4, present title in 1867, completed text 1881. The poem has undergone much revision, and a sizable fragment, in fact, shows early stages. A sentence in the chapter Spring of Thoreau's Walden, published 2 years before, that is to say 1854, published just 2 years before, expresses a thought of striking similarity. Here's Thoreau. We've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net. We've covered all of the books of Walden. You can go back and study this more closely if you want to. Quote, there was a dead horse in the hollow by the path to my home, which compelled me sometimes to go out of my way, especially in the night when the air was heavy. But the assurance it gave me of the strong appetite and inviolable health of nature was my compensation for this. And then Norton's will finish by pointing out that both in form and subject, this poem is essential. Whitman, one of his best. So Norton's saying this is one of the most important poems in Leaves of Grass. And comparison is made to Song of Myself, section 49. Just to remind you of that as we began, do you remember this? And as to you, corpse, I think you're good manure, but that does not offend me. I smell the white roses, sweet-scented and growing. I reach to the leafy lips. I reach to the polished breasts of melons. This is amazing erotica, right, for Whitman. And as to you, life, I reckon you are the leavings of many deaths. This, again, if you're going to call your poems Leaves of Grass, it's fun the way he plays with the word leaves and leavings. Leavings of many deaths. No doubt I've died myself 10,000 times before. Now, we obviously already worked with those lines. I think that there's a religious element as well here. Paul's sermon and understandings of life and death and resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15 comes to mind. That notion of the resurrection of the dead, I think, is standing behind so much of this. This is one of the most remarkable nature poems that you'll ever read. We'll take them in parts here. We'll begin with part 1. This compost. I love the use of the word this, by the way, in the title. Something, he says, startles me where I thought I was safest. By the way, startles gets used in Leaves of Grass only one time, and it's right here. I find that amazing. And then we're going to get 7 right away in the first stanza, 7 uses of the first person pronoun I. Something where I thought I was safest. Hey, do you remember just 2 poems ago when we were doing There Was a Child Went Forth? Do you remember that that he said the doubts, he says, the way he says it is, affection that will not be gainsaid, the sense of what is real, the thought, if after all it should prove unreal, the doubts of daytime, the doubts of nighttime, the curious whether or how, whether that which appears so, or is it all flashes and specks, men and women crowding fast in the streets? If they're not flashes and specks, what are they? I think we're playing with something very similar in this poem. Something startles me where I thought I was safest. I withdraw from the still woods I loved. I will not go now to the pastures to walk. I will not strip the clothes from my body to meet my lover, the sea. You'll go back to our comments on Lord Byron's Childe Harold's Pilgrimage from 1818. It was finished by that year. that he talks about making love to the ocean and all of that. I will not touch my flesh to the earth as to other flesh to renew me. In other words, I've decided I'm not gonna have any contact with the earth. Oh, how can it be? And notice now we're going to get 8 rhetorical questions, which asks a remarkable question. How can it be that the ground itself does not sicken? Now there was an idea at the time that Whitman is adopting here, miasma, which argued that you put dead bodies in the ground and putrefaction, all kinds of nastiness must obviously ensue. So the question is simple. You bury people in the ground, then how come everything that grows out of the ground isn't itself somehow putrefied and tainted, right? How can you be alive, you growths of spring? How can you furnish health, you blood of herbs, roots, orchards, grain? Obviously, leaves of grass immediately comes to mind with all those words. Are they not continually putting distempered corpses within you? In other words, we bury all the dead bodies. Is not every continent worked over and over with sour dead? It's a fascinating question, and I think standing behind a lot of this is Whitman's close reading of Shakespeare's Hamlet, especially you'll remember in Act 4, Scene 2, when Hamlet and Claudius are having that exchange regarding the dead body of Polonius. Where is Polonius? Oh, he's in heaven. Send thither to find him, and if you find him not there, go to the other place yourself. You'll remember that he makes this observation about how a king can go through progress through the guts of a beggar and all of that. I think we're playing a very similar game here. Where have you disposed of their carcasses? And again, Whitman's readers would immediately identify this with Hamlet 4:2. Those drunkards and gluttons of so many generations. In other words, rotten people. And what is it that the great figure says in Hamlet 5? Well, if he's not rotten before he dies, right? Those drunkards and gluttons of so many generations. Where have you drawn off all the foul liquid and meat? Right? I do not see any of it upon you today, or perhaps, and we're going to get to this word again. I love this word perhaps, because epistemologically, there's the fallibilist position. I'm not exactly sure what happens, but I think I know something about it. I could be wrong, right? Perhaps, he says, I am deceived. I will run a furrow with my plow. I'll press my spade through the sod and turn it up underneath. I'm sure I shall expose some of the foul meat. It's almost like a child's question in some ways. Like, okay, so you got this rotting corpse. You leave it above the ground and it does all kinds of disgusting things. You put it under the ground and grass grows out of it. We're back to Song of Myself, passage 6. How is this possible? Again, I think, as I've said to you before, I think the key word of Leaves of Grass might be the word curious. He's curious about this. So that's the first section. Now to the second section. Behold. In other words, hey, pay attention, right? We're going to get this word behold now a couple of times. Behold, this compost. Behold it well. By the way, in the 1856 version of this, the line actually ran like this. Behold, this is the compost of billions of premature corpses. And that was edited away to this one. Behold this compost. Behold it well. Perhaps, we're back to the word perhaps, every mite has once formed part of a sick person. Yet, behold the grass. Now, watch the cataloging that we'll see with the repetition of the word the, anaphoria happening here. And of course, leaves of grass. The grass of spring covers the prairies. The bean bursts noiselessly. Do you remember this when he says it in passage 48 of Song of Myself? To show a bean in its spot confounds the learning of all times, right? A bean bursts noiselessly through the mold in the garden. Now, I love that he uses the word garden here. It does take us back to, of course, Hamlet, that he will say in 1:2 that the world is an unweeded garden, things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. But I think more importantly for Whitman is, of course, the garden. That is to say, Genesis 3 in the Garden of Eden, and by extension, obviously, Milton's Paradise Lost. We've given full lectures on that at learnstrong.net as well. The delicate, he loves that word, right? The delicate spear of the onion pierces upwards, and it's interesting that he uses the verb pierces. It can have a sexual rendering, obviously it can have a violent, we think, go back to drum taps, right? The apple buds cluster together on the apple branches. In other words, it's kind of an amazing thing that out of death, life grows. The resurrection, and I think it's intentional that he uses this word after renew me from line 5. The resurrection of the wheat appears with pale visage out of its graves. The tinge awakes over the willow tree and the mulberry tree. Of course, if we're talking T.S. Eliot, and the four quartets, it's the yew tree, as we've commented at learnstrong.net, as we've talked about all of the four quartets poems. The he-birds carol mornings and evenings while the she-bird sits on their nests. Obviously, we think of the opening lines of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the general prologue, so nature pricks them. The young of poultry break through the hatched eggs. It is a remarkable thing. And of course, as a child, Whitman growing up, witnessing all this, there was a child went forth. It's kind of miraculous, right? How is it possible that all of these things happen in nature? It's so compelling. The newborn of animals appear, the calves drop from the cow, the colt from the mare. Out of its little hill faithfully rise the potatoes' dark green leaves, obviously leaves of grass. Like I said to you guys, I think Whitman's having a lot of fun. Out of its hill rises the yellow maize stalk, the lilacs bloom in the dooryards. Obviously, there's an important poem that we've already studied about Lincoln's passing, and I think a lot of lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed is now being referenced. Oh yeah, there's that echo, and now he's talking about how things die and then they come back to life. Well, hello, that was pretty much what Memories of Lincoln was really about as a section, right? America will not die with the death of its great leader. The summer growth is innocent, back to a child went forth, and disdainful above all those strata of sour dead. In other words, somehow there's this ability nature has to transcend. What? Chemistry. Now, making reference here directly to a chemist who had written Justice Liebig in 1846. He had a famous chemistry text that Whitman knew about, where he argued that out of putrefaction comes this thing he called metamorphoses, and obviously we think of Kafka's Metamorphoses as well. What chemistry? And then 9 that's in a row, that the winds are really not infectious, that this is no cheat, this transparent green wash of the sea, which is so amorous after me, that it's safe to, back to the opening lines right of the poem, that it's safe to allow it to lick my naked body all over with its tongues. Of course, again, we're familiar with this as we, were messing around with Song of Myself 49 just a few moments ago, the erotica that Whitman can pull off amazingly. That it will not engender me with the fevers that have deposited themselves in it. I mean, you bury a leper in the ground, but the grass that grows and the grain that grows out of that you eat, you don't get leprosy. It's fascinating. That all is clean forever and forever. Go back to the last lines of Song of Myself 48. It's pretty amazing how he repeats it here. That the cool drink from the well tastes so good. That blackberries are so flavorous and juicy. That the fruits of the apple orchard and the orange orchard, that melons, grapes, peaches, plums, will none of them poison me. Again, back to, I think it's intentionally uses the word poison here, takes us back to the Genesis 3 story in Eden, of course takes us to Milton in Paradise Lost, of man's first disobedience to the fruit of that forbidden tree, right, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. That when I recline on the grass, back to Song of Myself, passage 1, I do not catch any disease. It's quite remarkable. Though probably every spear of grass reaches out of what was once a catching disease. Well, obviously we're playing around now with Song of Myself, passage 6. I find a poem like this remarkable because it's like he draws. I think he's playing all kinds of linguistic acrobatics. He's having a lot of fun writing this poem, I think, and we should have fun. We should have fun enjoying reading it as well, you guys. Notice, you put a diseased person like a leper in the ground, you bury him, but you can lay on the grass that grows out of them and you don't get leprosy. How can you account for that? Now, he says, I am terrified at the earth. Now, the word terrified has multiple meanings. One of them can just be in awe of, and I think that's how he's using it. It is, notice here, the repetition of the word it is that calm and patient. Now, obviously, Emerson's essay, Nature, comes to mind in 1836. I'm going to mention as well here in a little bit, William Cullen Bryant's Thanatopsis comes to mind. That's the 1817 poem. We've commented on all those at learnstrong.net. Now I'm terrified at the earth. That it's, by the way, capitalized earth. That it's calm and patient. It grows such sweet things out of such corruptions. It turns harmless and stainless on its axis with such endless successions of diseased corpses. And again, the use of the word endless takes us to Lao Tzu and the Taoist philosophies of the Tao Te Ching. It distills such exquisite winds. Again, the word exquisite comes to mind for a poem like this. Out of such infused fervor. This, by the way, is the only use of that word, fervor. And, of course, we're talking now about the nasty potential smell of a rotten corpse. It renews, back to the beginning of the poem. This poem is really tight, the way Whitman has edited it. It renews with such unwitting looks its prodigal, annual, sumptuous, notice that's 3, crops. It gives such divine, and that's the key word, I think, of the poem, materials to men, and accepts such leavings. I told you how much fun he's having, right, with that word, leavings. Such leavings from them at last. And of course, the last two words of the poem, at last, will take us back to the opening words, something startles me where I thought I was safe. And it's as if we've gone full circle, which is, I think, the very design of the poem. We are designed to go from a certain level of startled fear to an acceptance, and then finally to a celebration that at last, it's an amazing, miraculous thing that grass grows. And there we are. We're back to the symbol of all symbols of leaves of grass. At 2a, well, I think the key here is what Emerson will have taught, I think Emerson probably more than anybody, taught Whitman, and that is that nature teaches us the miracle of renewal. It is forever possible. I mean, what is it that Shelley says in Ode to the West Wind? If winter come, can spring be far behind? I think that idea of rejuvenation is obviously there. The repetition in 2b is remarkable, and the way in which there's a certain kind of, I would argue, rhetorical argument that's being played out here with that word perhaps, the epistemological, ontological questions that ultimately will take us past the psychological and sociological fears to a theodicy that is sustained all the way through Leaves of Grass. Let's go back again and just read those last lines, right, of Song of Myself. We can do that really fast. You'll remember this. Song of Myself, passage 6. We've read these lines so many times because they're so precious. As he asks, I perceive after so many uttering tongues, I perceive they do not come from the roofs of mouths for nothing. I wish I could translate the hints about the dead young men and women, and the hints about the old men and mothers, and the offspring taken soon out of their laps. What do you think's become of the young and old men? What do you think's become of the women and children? They are alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death. And if ever there was, it led forward life, and does not wait at the end to arrest it, and ceased the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward, and nothing collapses. And to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier to at last, right? Finally, as we've mentioned at 3a, Thanatopsis comes to mind, the 1817 offering of Bryant. Emerson's obviously Nature of 1836, and we already quoted in through Norton's our Thoreau's Walden of 1854. Finally, at 3b, has reading, just a question to help you own a poem like this, has reading Leaves of Grass made you more curious about the questions of life, death, resurrection and renewal, nature? I hope all of that is happening for you. Thank you.